Welcome back, everyone, to the Occam's Razor Untitled podcast. My name is Diego, and I'm going to give you some bad news. My beloved sister is not with us. She'll be back in the studio at some point, but for right now, she's MIA. But I am not alone. Thankfully, I have a celebrity of East Bay, as I would like to put it. We have the most famous Sam on the street with us here today. Sam, welcome to the Occam's Razors podcast.
I'm happy to be here, helping my good friend Diego out, apparently as a celebrity guest.
Yeah, a celebrity guest. Our first time we ever brought a celebrity, minus the interviews that we've had on this podcast. I know the past couple episodes we've been talking mostly about TV shows, anime, movies, but we've kind of not focused on video games yet. And I brought Sam because we both are experts in RPGs, and we like to play a lot of RPGs. So this is mostly what the episode's going to be about. Talking about what makes a good RPG from a gamer standpoint, but also from like a writing standpoint. But before we jump into it, Sam, some of the listeners may not know you from TikTok or Instagram, but so just briefly introduce yourself.
All right, so like you said, I'm Sam. I just recently graduated with a bachelor's in history, but I start the graduate program here at East Bay in the fall. Yes, thank you. So I do have a lot of experience writing, but not necessarily video game writing. But I'd say my favorite video game of all time is actually Mass Effect, especially Mass Effect 3, if you guys can dunk on me for that. I love 3 so many. I've played it so many times. I love that game.
Mm-hmm. So let's just talk about Mass Effect for a bit. I am currently going through Mass Effect. I'm currently taking a pause from playing 3, but from your point of view, what makes Mass Effect, the franchise, great?
Well, I know, like, going into it, it's very different from maybe other traditional RPGs. You know, you make your character like most let you do, but then you have, like, your core squad, and you make lots of different choices, and there's so many different endings you could get based off how you play your Shepard. And it's very much like you're in the seat. This is you making your decisions. This is you as Shepard. And so it's a little different maybe from, say, The Witcher, or even, you know, a JRPG like Final Fantasy. It's very different because you're in the driver's seat, basically.
Yeah, I think, and then within the first game, it's definitely one of those games where they're finding BioWare found we're trying to find their footing within the franchise, you know, because there's not your choices do matter in the first game, but like if you compare it to like the second game, where a lot of what you have to do matters because it determines the fate of your crew members, right? And for those of you who did play Mass Effect 2 or are just familiar with the Mass Effect franchise, it's basically just about humans going out to space, colonizing everything, but they also encounter other species of aliens, and they just basically try to coexist and fight this very threat that the whole trilogy is building up to. Well, the third game, you basically fight the big baddie that's been built up to. But in the second game, a lot of your choices do matter because if you don't do certain things or don't do certain quests, a lot of your crew members can die. And ultimately, I think if you really get the bad ending, everyone could die.
Yeah, including you. So
including you, exactly.
Spoiler.
Yeah, spoiler. Don't get that ending. But to focus on the side characters, right? Because I think from what I've seen with the first two games, what makes Mass Effect is not only the story, right? But also the people that you interact with. And so what are your thoughts on the crew up until the second game? Don't spoil
third game. One, each of the characters are very like unique. They all have their own things. Like you have, for example, Caden. He's a bio-using guy, soldier. Then you have Ashley, who hates aliens and all this kind of stuff. They're very unique, and that's not, specifically BioWare, but what makes it different is they react to your choices. Their choices have an effect on you. Like it's a back and forth kind of thing that maybe a lot of other games don't have. Is they're a part of the story as much as you are, and what happens to them affects what happens to the ending of the game, like in Mass Effect 2, where you can totally botch the whole thing because you lost Jack or you lost Miranda or whoever is in the game, you lost them. And so that can totally affect the whole game's ending, depending on who's in it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think going to talking about side characters, they are what mostly can, besides you pushing the story, you as the player and also as the main character, side characters are also the make or break in RPGs.
Right.
And if a game developer or game writer can't write a good side character, then it's going to be annoying when, let's say, you have to take them on a quest or you have to do their personal quest. You have to write them in a way that you are also invested in them. I think Obsidian has been great. I think I saw a video once where they said that Obsidian's side characters are the best because let's just say, right? Let's talk about Fallout New Vegas, right? Fallout New Vegas has like what, too many side? I think they have a lot of companions, right? And side characters that accompany you. A lot of them are, well, in general, the Fallout universe is very, while it could be exaggerated, it's also real when it comes to its people, because a lot of people, go through tragic things. In Fallout New Vegas, the people that you encounter as your companions, you hear about their backstories.
Yeah, I think I generally really like side characters. Like, speaking on, I really like Final Fantasy, especially Final Fantasy 7. And that one has extremely memorable side characters, even though it's different from, say, like BioWare, where their choices and your choices and everything kind of mixed together. Final Fantasy 7 is very like straightforward. There's specific arcs for all the characters. There's not a whole lot of changing things, but you have iconic characters in that game still that people love, like Tifa, Barret, Aerith, and there's also villains like Sephiroth, who you can't play as. You only play as Cloud, but they're still incredibly memorable and people that players care about. And it's just like they've crafted really interesting stories for those people, and that's why they end up interesting and people care about them, is because their backstory and their story from the point you meet them onwards is really interesting or compelling, and that's why people like side characters so much.
Yeah, and we talked about this last episode where if you're writing an ensemble cast, right, like Mass Effect, for example, your side characters should not all be the same, right? Like, they each should have their own distinct personalities, and a lot of the choices you make in RPGs may not sit well with a lot of the side characters, right? So, like, let's say I'm trying to think of an RPG where not everyone. Well, let's just take the Have you played the Telltale games?
Yes, I've played a couple of them.
Which one have you played?
I played part of the Guardians of the Galaxy one.
Okay.
I played the Game of Thrones one. Very upset that they haven't come out with the second one.
Well, I don't know if you knew, but Telltale's dead.
I'm very upset about that. I was upset.
But okay, let's take Guardians of the Galaxy, right? I think some of the choices you make as Peter Quill in the Guardians of the Galaxy game, some of the choices you make do not sit well with the rest of the Guardians, right?
Right.
And I think that makes it realistic, because obviously in real life, some of the choices you might make may not sit well with other people, even if you think it's the right thing, or if you're going through an evil playthrough, it's just straight up evil. But I think that's also required when it comes to writing characters. You need to make them believable, and do not make them all yes men to your decisions, because, I mean, the worst RPGs are the ones where like everyone basically does not care what you do.
Well, have you ever played Dragon Age, the original one?
I have not played the original one.
I've played all of them, but in the first one, there's a choice you can make towards the end of the game that, depending on what you do, you lose one of the people that's been with you through the whole game. He'll be so upset by the decision that he'll be like, I don't want anything to do with you. You can go fight the final bad guy by yourself. I don't care. And he'll leave because he's so upset by the choice you make at the end. Versus if you make a different choice, he's like, oh, I love you. You're great. You're my best friend forever. So your choices in some games have huge impact.
And that is the core of RPGs. You are the one pushing the story. Yeah, in some games, like, there may be the illusion of choices and stuff like that, but, the most iconic RPGs are the ones where your choices do matter, right? And going back to Fallout, right? I think Fallout is very famous for having many endings, many choices where it does matter in the end. In Fallout 3, right? We've talked about Fallout in the podcast before, so people are aware of what Fallout is. But in Fallout 3, the main plot kicks off where your father leaves the vault, right?
Right.
And so you, as the lone wanderer, have to go out and find him. And one of the first missions you undertake is going to Megaton, deciding the fate of Megaton, because if you don't play Fallout 3, at the core of the town, there's this huge nuclear bomb that has not detonated yet. And someone in the town wants you to detonate it just because, right? And if you go ahead and detonate the bomb, the entire town explodes, and there's this big crater left in the middle of the town. And when you eventually do find your father, spoilers, when you do eventually find your father, he finds out what you did, and he's very, very upset with what you did.
And there's even other quests that connects to, like if you've played Tenpenny Tower, that connects to it, and that has a whole like consequences depending on what you do in Tenpenny Tower and in Megaton, and it's a whole like web. And then your dad always points out, oh, I heard you did this or did that.
Yeah.
I'm proud or very disappointed.
Exactly. And again, like, the choices should be all realistic, right? Because, I mean, in Fallout, yeah, like, there's good and bad choices, right? But let's just say in New Vegas, right? it's never clear on what was the good choice or not. It's just what you feel at the moment or what you think is the most logical, right? And going back to side characters, companions, and what your choices matter, there's this one side character that you meet, Veronica, who was part of the Brotherhood of Steel. And if you do her personal quest, you end up deciding whether or not she should stay within this group called the Brotherhood of Steel. And the game does not really tell you what's the right choice.
Well, what's funny with that too is I played New Vegas for the first time like 2 years ago. When I played it, I didn't know who she was. I had seen her after I already ran into the Brotherhood and I destroyed the base. So she didn't talk to me. And I didn't know why. And I didn't know who she was until later. And I was like, oh, because I couldn't figure out why she didn't want to talk to me. She was like, get out of here. I was like, what did I do?
It's funny because actually, doing a little side tangent. It's funny because I think I've seen a playthrough where, like, if you admit to her that you destroyed the Brotherhood of Steel, she's like, oh, okay, I'm going to kill you right now.
Yeah, she did that to me. And I was like, well, what did I do? What did I do? And I didn't know that killing the Brotherhood was a lie. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but the way the game presents it is that it does not say, like, okay, what you're going to do matters, right? It's just like you do it and there's no reward at the end. And a lot of side quests and within, like, let's say Fallout 3, right? No matter what you do in Fallout 4, I mean, in Fallout 4, whatever, it's a good or bad choice, you always get a reward. The game developer could be like, oh yeah, your time was worth this because you got this item, right? But I saw a video once where they said that New Vegas is very special because it does not give you a reward at the end of a quest, because sometimes there is no reward whenever you make a big decision, right? Sometimes you're just left with that feeling, right? And that's why New Vegas is so loved, right? Because of the choices, because of the choices you as the player make within the game. Kind of like now talking about New Vegas and just the Fallout in general, I kind of want to get your perspective. Would you consider yourself a big Fallout fan?
Yeah.
What do you think makes Fallout special in an RPG standpoint? Why do you think the universe is so beloved?
Well, I think Fallout and just a lot of like Western RPGs in general, like Skyrim, same by Bethesda, or Mass Effect, is that it's totally your choice. You have free reign over this world, and it may have lots of people in it, lots of different factors in it, but you're in control, and you can have this world be what you want it to be. You can make Fallout be entirely a building simulator, and you can never leave the opening section in Sanctuary.
Yeah.
Or you could be a raider king in Nuka World, or you could be the leader of the Minutemen and that's all you do. Like, it's totally up to you how you want to play the game and what you want to do. And I think that appeals to a lot of people like me, where I could just gallivant across the wasteland doing whatever I want. And I could do it in all kinds of different ways.
Do you think the world you are in right now, whether it's just, let's say, Earth, or again, like BioWare's Mass Effect or Fallout, do you think that matters as much as well?
I think the setting does matter. Like, for example, you haven't played it. I have a PC. I've played Starfield.
No.
One thing that I noticed with Starfield compared to like Skyrim is that Starfield is set in like the most boring timeline of that world.
Yeah.
Because there's this whole background about there was this intergalactic war and you were fighting zealots versus, people who just want to live without laws and all this stuff. And the game takes place immediately after that. Yeah. That's already ended. That's gone. And you're like, so I'm just in a world where everything's already been discovered and there's not really anything for me to do. And there are like cool little factions and all this stuff, but you're like, but I could have been doing that. Like in Skyrim, you're in the middle of the Civil War with, the Stormcloaks and the Empire, and you've got
the dragons have just
come back, and you got all this crazy stuff. Versus in Starfield, it's like, well, I'm here. What do I do now?
What do I do?
Yeah, I've been trying to play that game, and I'm like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah, and it's also bad because there's been so many RPGs that have come out, and there is no original. We talked to this before. There is no original ideas anymore.
Yeah.
It's just how you make
how you
tell it. And so with Starfield, I mean, I remember when people were super excited for Starfield because it's like, okay, it's a new IP that Bethesda's making. They're known for making, great RPGs, right? And so people were looking forward to it because it's like it's in space, it's going to be like Fallout. It might be able to have a little bit of Skyrim. Who know how many endings we'll have in this game and stuff like that. And it's bland because the world feels bland, and the characters feel bland, the environment, the dialogue feels bland.
Everything just feels kind of like, oh, it's all been decided already. You're in this group that they're exploring the unknown. They're going out there and doing all kinds of cool stuff, but then you go to a place that they're like, oh, it's got a secret temple no one's ever been to, and then you turn around and there's a abandoned mining facility right there, and you're like, you're telling me nobody went to this thing in the 80 years that was there? Like, and it's just like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't entice the player. Skyrim, like you mentioned earlier, it entices the player because there is that hook, right? Within the first 15 minutes of Skyrim, you already know much about the world. You know that you're a prisoner. There's a civil war going on. Dragons have just come back.
Just popped up.
You are by what? I think maybe depending on how fast you play or not, within an hour, the first hour, you are the Dragonborn. There's so many things. They throw so much at you, and there's these options available where you can pursue the main quest. And I think Bethesda, they said this before, where the main quest is super short because they want the player to not just focus on the main quest. They also want them to focus on other things within the world.
Right.
Because it can be argued that there's 5, 6 technically main quests in the game, because there's the Civil War, there's the main quest, there's the Dark Brotherhood.
And you actually can't finish the main quest until you do the Civil War one.
Exactly. And it goes back because I think depending on if you complete the Civil War quest line before you finish the main quest line, it actually kind of affects the main quest.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so again, that's how you kind of create that RPG where it's enticing for the player to continue exploring. I think Nakano's shifting towards the bad side of it, focusing a little bit on the bad side. That's what Starfield failed, right? And I remember there's this video I saw where someone compared Starfield to Cyberpunk, right? Because at the time, Cyberpunk was at its peak with Phantom Liberty coming out. And if you don't know what Cyberpunk is, it's basically this dystopian future where corporations are basically our overlords. And it's set in California, Los Angeles, I think, Night City.
Yeah, it's outside LA or something like that.
Yeah, but they compared this scene, right, where you as the main player, V, you are approaching these gangsters and you're trying to get something out of them, right? And the way that it is written and the way you decide what happens kind of grabs the player's attention. Compared to Starfield, where there's this one scene where I think you're negotiating with someone, it's very bland. There's hardly any music. There's no music. There's no point because no matter what you say.
There's one mission towards the beginning of Starfield where you have to convince this guy to give you some maps.
I think that's what I'm talking about.
And it turns out he's the father of one of your companions, but they're estranged and they're descendants of the founder of the colony you're on. It's a whole thing. And I'm like, oh, this must be a whole long thing, right? You go up and you have to convince him to give you the maps and give them to the son, basically. Yeah. And it's 2 dialogue options.
Yeah.
You convince him to give it to you, and that's the last you ever see of him. That's it. And unless you ask your companion, there's nothing else about it. And he has hardly anything to say about it. You don't run into him again. You don't help him fix his relationship with his father. That's it. That's done. I'm almost finished with the story, and that's never come up again.
Yeah.
And that character's never come up again.
Compared to Cyberpunk, where depending on what you do in that situation, it can bite back at you later in the game, where you're trying to get something and they're returning, and based on what you decided, they can end up trying to kill you, or they'll end up letting you go peacefully and stuff like that. Or you can still end up killing them. I mean, it's kind of, again, Cyberpunk lets you decide what happens. And I think focusing a bit more on those RPGs that are kind of restrictive, right? So I think the best example I could provide right now is the Witcher series, right? So if you don't know, the Witcher series, or video games, I guess, not the Netflix, we don't talk about the Netflix show.
Yeah, we won't go there.
We won't go there. But the Witcher series franchise is based off, the video games are based off books written by, I don't know how to say
Andrzej Sapkowski.
Sapkowski? Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure how you say his name. I've read a couple of them.
Yeah, so it's based off those books, and the video games basically take place after, spoiler, Geralt, the main character, supposedly dies, right? So the video games pick up where the books left off, and it's considered an RPG because, you are taking control of Geralt, right? But then the question is, how is it an RPG if there's already a story to Geralt, right? He's already made choices. There's already 7 books about him.
Right.
How is it an RPG, right? Well, in the first game, Geralt has amnesia, right? And it's a good way to write it because it first introduces you as a player into this world who have not read the books, but also just kind of shows you the ropes about what the world is, what the factions are, what's going on, Geralt's friends, and all this type of stuff, right? In the second game, Geralt's memory has started to come back a little bit more. You are already aware of what's the faction, stuff like that, but it also introduces you more into the world where there's this war going on between the Northern Realms. I think it's Northern Realms versus...
Northern versus Novigrad. Oh, no.
Tamara. No, hold up. No.
What's that? Nilfgaard.
Nilfgaard versus.
Nilfgaard.
Versus. Fuck, what was it?
Versus everyone in the north.
Okay,
like
there you go.
Temeria and
Yeah. There's so many factions.
Kovir and all these other ones. They're all fighting.
And so, so then the second game takes you through that, and it provides more story to Geralt, more of his backstory. And so by the third game, you kind of already know Geralt at that point. He's already gotten his memory back. He knows who he is and stuff like that. So then how is it? How's an RPG if...
Well, let's be honest. Everyone's only played the third one.
Let's be honest, yeah. Okay, second and third game.
Maybe second, definitely third.
The third
Nobody's
game.
played the first one.
No one's played
I've played all three. And the only one I enjoy playing is the third one.
It's funny because I have the first game and the second game, but I have not played it, and I just have it just because I want to
just to have it.
To have it. But in the third game, it's already been established, and it's because of how you can shape Geralt in the third game that the way the writers write him, they gave him two choices in which both choices can be argued on why Geralt would choose this, right? And I think that is the beauty in which CDPR wrote Geralt. They write him as like he's a character that will make these choices, but also it's written in a way where the player feel like they can make these choices as well. And overall, the way that the Witcher world is shaped, it's very interesting, you know?
Right.
It took me like 2 playthroughs to get into the world of the Witcher because while the story may not be like super superb, I mean, yeah, you're trying to find your daughter figure, spoiler for the third game, you're trying to find Ciri. It's not the main thing. There's these quests that are going on, the Witcher contracts. As you know, within the world of the Witcher, Geralt is named as the Witcher because in the world you are hunting monsters. Just to simplify for this podcast's sake, and so you take on these contracts where this world is run by monsters, and so you are hired by locals to get these monsters. And I think that people have said that is the core of The Witcher because these monsters you are hunting are not just simple monster hunt missions, right? There is a story. You're trying to figure out what the monster is. You are concocting potions on how to defeat the monster because if you're playing in a higher difficulty, you're going to need those potions to try to beat the monster, right? And I'm sorry if I'm rambling on a bit long, but what do you think made The Witcher, more specifically, what do you think made The Witcher 3 great in terms of an RPG?
I think a lot of the heavy lifting was how interesting the story was and how interesting Geralt himself can be. Even though you do pick some of his dialogue and you make some of his choices, it's still like that's Geralt. People love the way Geralt's written, and the author has gone on about how much he hates the way that Geralt's written. He doesn't like him. He doesn't like the games, but millions of people have bought it and like it a lot because they find Geralt hilarious or Geralt's really cool and the way he fits into the story. And the story is crazy if you guys have played it.
It's crazy.
It's all over the place. There's witches, there's monsters, there's elves.
Gods.
There's gods. There's interdimensional elves.
Yeah.
It's a whole, long like fantasy opera type thing, kind of like almost like The Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is the story is really cool and you want to play as Geralt through that story.
Yeah.
And so it's a mix of having a cool main character and a really cool story that you could play through that makes a lot of people want to play it.
Yeah, it's definitely the character, the story, and also the world as well. I think what makes Geralt even more interesting, when Geralt became a Witcher, because he was once human, right?
Right.
He goes through it's stated in the lore that the way to become a Witcher is that you are supposed to go through these trials, right? And it's a very dangerous trial. Not a lot of people survive. Like what it's saying that 3 out of 10 boys, 3 survive, right? That's how dangerous.
Very few.
Very few. And it strips you of emotions, right? And so when you play as Geralt, he does not really have expression, right? He cannot cry. He cannot laugh. He can chuckle, but he cannot. He cannot straight up laugh. Yeah.
But everything's very deadpan.
But the way that they write him, like you can feel that emotion from him.
Well, I think Geralt too is helped by. I mean, he's got Yennefer, Vesemir, Ciri when she comes in. There's all these, or Triss too. She plays a big part, and so it's all these other characters that help Geralt be able to like shine and show his character. When without them, there would be no.
And he considers them as friends. As a person who does not have emotion, how can a character have friends if he doesn't have emotion? Well, it's kind of interesting because the way Sapkowski writes it is that, well, yeah, while his emotions are stripped away, does not mean that the inside of him has been stripped away. And there's this death in The Witcher 3 where, I'm not going to spoil who dies in The Witcher 3, but there's this certain dialogue that you can pick where Geralt says he can't cry, he doesn't know how it feels, right? And then Ciri then hugs him, and then you feel that like that pain that he feels. And even when he looks at the dead body, you can see that pain on his face, even if he cannot cry, right? Because everyone else is crying, right? Ciri's on the floor, they're crying. Yennefer is very much distraught. I mean, Geralt's the only one who isn't crying, but you can still feel that he's devastated by it.
Right. And even though the game is like on very specific rails, it's still like you're Geralt, you've played this game, you've been him this whole time, killing monsters, finding Ciri. And so when you have these things happen, like when the character dies, it's like, oh man, he was my teacher.
And like you said earlier, like people jumped into The Witcher and Witcher 3, right? And I've seen playthroughs where they've only played The Witcher 3, but yet when that character dies, like people get emotional. I think another part that makes RPGs so great is how realistic it can get. There's this one mission. It's one of the first missions you undertake in the game, where you approach this herbalist, and on the bed there's this dying girl, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so Carol then suggests, I can make a potion for her, but the potion is made for me specifically. For her as a normal person, she could die.
Yeah.
It could be fatal, right? But then, if you decide to do it, Carol then gives her the potion, and the herbalist asks, why did you do that? And Carol just says, it's better than just doing nothing, right?
Right.
Then, once you're out in the open, if you go to the certain section, you then get approached by the girl's boyfriend, and he says that like, she's feeling better, but she cannot look at me, she cannot talk, she doesn't feel like doing anything. And then the dude says to girl, I don't know if I feel like punching you or just saying thank you. And girl is like, well, it's better than just doing nothing. And that feels real, because it's a real answer to like something. It makes sense within the world, right? Because of course it worked for him. Of course it would be fatal for her. And there is no happy ending. I think that's the whole thing with The Witcher 2. There is almost no happy ending in the universe.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of times in these games, there's just endings you could live with.
Yeah.
A lot of games just give you like tough moral quandaries to ponder over. Like in The Witcher, it's like, do you help the girl? Do you not and just let her die? Or Fallout is, do you save the synths or do you kill them? In Fallout 3, do you poison the water or do you fix it?
Yeah.
Like it always presents you like these.
Yeah.
Are you going to be kind of morally gray person? You're going to be a bad person? You're going to be a good person? What are you going to do? And they're built on a lot of these like moral questions of what are you going to do? Are you going to make the right choice? Are you going to make the wrong choice? How's the choice presented?
Yeah. And I think talking about still like RPGs, right? The most famous thing RPGs have are the number of endings one can have, right? And so do you think that the endings should matter? And does it even matter that there's multiple endings?
I think endings are tough, especially like, for example, we could take Mass Effect 3. That one was, run through the ground. This is a terrible ending. This game is awful. How could you end it this way?
The 3-button choice.
The 3 buttons.
Yeah.
Do you want red, blue, or green? And I think they added do you want none of them? But it doesn't have, that ending choice is not influenced by what you did before. But I've always made the argument, it was the journey. All these people that you met have their endings. It's the friends we made along the way, Diego.
Exactly.
All these people have their endings affected by what you did before. And the ending does have some bearing on what you did before that point in the game. But there is still the fact that at the end, it's 3 choices. And when people look back at Mass Effect 3, that's what they think of, is those 3 choices. And people are upset about that. Versus, say, The Witcher, you've got a ton of different choices. Nobody fully agrees on what the right ending is, because it can be all kind of customized and so many different options. But I think the ending is important. It just depends on how you execute it. If Mass Effect 3 had been executed more like The Witcher, where there was a mix of what you did throughout the game that at least somewhat had an effect on the ending, people probably wouldn't look at it so badly. But they didn't do that. And because there really was no way for you to change the ending, nobody liked it.
Yeah.
People were very upset about it.
Yeah.
Still.
I understand from a developer standpoint, that's hard. Like, to keep track of every single choice a player could potentially make, like, that's hard. Like, that's why I respect Mass Effect 2 so much, is because, like the endings to that game affect what you make during the game, right? It's hard to just keep track of, okay, if this player did not do this quest, that means that they gotta die. But what if they did this? So that could they still live? Like, what if there's a lot of factors when it comes to endings.
If you played Dragon Age Inquisition, the first two games, there's so many choices that before you play Inquisition, you have to go to a separate website to fill in everything you did in the first two games,
Jeez.
then jump into Inquisition to see what happens. And that's how they handle it.
Is that good or bad?
It depends on if you really... I personally really like my hero, Ferelden. That's the original character from Origins, so I do go back and I make sure that everything's the way that I wanted it. But a lot of people think that it's ridiculous that they make us go to a separate website. Sometimes it doesn't work. It can be really frustrating, but it's frustrating because people want their choices to matter in Dragon Age Inquisition.
Yeah.
And they'd be more upset if they can't do it at all.
Yeah. Definitely. I agree with that as well. At the end of the day, like, endings should matter. I think there should be multiple endings, because if it's just one ending to an RPG, it kind of feels like the player did what they did not matter, right? If there's multiple endings, if the player feels more validated, because it's like, okay, then I got this unique special ending. The game studio that I respect the most in terms of RPGs is the ones that made Detroit Become Human. What are they called?
I forget, I know exactly.
Yeah,
they made Detroit Become Human. What's that?
Heavy Rain.
Heavy Rain. They're known for that kind of movie, but you make choices, and all your choices can be different.
They're known for, like, making video games feel like a movie, right? And that's, like, a whole debate on its own, like, whether or not video games should be like movies or something like that. But at the end of the day, like, in Detroit Become Human, for example, the choices that you make in that game, like, my goodness, there is a lot of endings to that game.
Well, they even, like, encourage you to go back, replay it, do something different, and see what happens, and see how that affects all the other ones.
It encourages you to do multiple playthroughs, and there's like 3 main characters. 2 of them could be good, 1 of them could be bad, all of them could be bad, maybe all of them could be good, like maybe 1 of them is bad or good or something like that.
I haven't finished it, but there's like one mission where you can go out, you've run away from home with someone, you have the choice of sneaking into an abandoned house and sleeping there, or stealing from a store to get money to buy a motel room and sleep in there. And it has like a whole different consequences depending on if you get the abandoned house or the motel room, or if you just slept out on the street.
And I think that's what I respect the most, because I remember when my sister played it, in the game, like, it's not one of those things where if you mess up, you have to do it again. No, I think it's styled as if you make the choice, you made the choice. There is no, if you want to go back and redo that choice, you're going to have to replay it, like, that mission again, right? And so, like, and your characters can die, like, very early on. Like, yes, depending on the ending, like, they might die, right? Yeah. But they can also die within the middle of the story. Yeah, because I know there's this one mission where if you really, really mess up, your girl character and the girl that you're protecting, they both can die, and then they're left completely out of the story. And there's like a special post-credit scene where they're revived and stuff like that. But yeah, your characters could die in the middle. Your story could literally end by like the second mission before the ending. Like, it's crazy how expansive it is. And you also showed the tree. You know, the tree? Yeah, it shows like literally the potential choices you can make.
Yeah, there's so many different ones. Even in, like, I don't know if it's actually an RPG technically, but have you ever played Life is Strange? It also has the same thing, like, did you do this? And it just shows you at the end, like, this is what happened if you did these things. And it's less like, ooh, you made a wrong choice, gotta start over. It's like, this is what happens when you made the choice that you made.
Talking about that, what are your thoughts on developers specifically stating a good or bad choice? Like, does it make you cringe? Does it make it easier for you to make a choice? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I think that just comes down to, do they want a sequel? Because, like, for example, you ever played Infamous?
Yeah, I played Infamous.
The first 2 games, it's good. They're able to jump off from the first one into the second one, but the second one has a very specific choice that, depending on what you do, there is no third game. And the developer said they went back and they looked at what choice did players make the most. And they found it was the good guy, because, there's a good guy, bad guy choices throughout Infamous. It's very specific. And they found that most people made the good guy choice. And so they're like, well, we're going to make a third game, and we're going to base it off of that choice, off of that good guy choice you make at the end. Yeah. And so I feel like when they say, oh, this ending's canon or this ending is canon, it just is like, well, they have to pick one if they want to make more.
Ooh, this actually connects good to Fallout. Spoilers for the Fallout TV show. I think if you want to turn it off right now, I think I would recommend turning it off. In the Fallout TV show, it is set a couple years after the events.
Like 9 years.
9 years after 4. But technically, it's a little bit more years after New Vegas, because it's set in California. And if you watch the show, it's very, very NCR they're mentioned a lot. The Brotherhood of Steel are very mentioned a lot and stuff like that. And so the issue with the ending of the TV show is that once, I forgot his name, but the bad dude, when he goes to New Vegas, it is destroyed. And
all the lights are off.
All the lights are off. All the walls are destroyed. There's nothing left, right? And gamers have been complaining about, well, what's the ending to New Vegas then? Because some may say, I personally chose the NCR to stay, but then some others say, oh, I chose a Legion, or New Vegas was independent, or it was run by Mr. House. There is 4 endings to New Vegas, and all of it kind of comes into question now, because it's like, okay, then what happened to New Vegas if it's supposed if I wanted it to be saved?
And some people argued like, oh, it invalidates New Vegas, or
what's your thoughts on that when a game developer tries to do something like that? Or like,
I feel like the problem is, if people want them to be able to go back to, say, New Vegas or continue off of New Vegas, they're just going to have to pick one. Like, if they want a New Vegas 2, well, somebody has to win at Hoover Dam to be able to have a New Vegas 2. You can't just, it's open-ended. Well, where's the Legion? Where's NCR? You're just not going to have them in it?
Yeah, where's Yesman? Where's House? Is he alive?
And so that's why, like, the TV show, you find out, spoiler, the Brotherhood of Steel from the East Coast is there. The Pridwin is there. So obviously the endings where the Pridwin is destroyed are not valid anymore. Yeah. It has to be one where the Pridwin makes it. So Brotherhood of Steel.
Yeah, that's why if making a game or stuff like that, or even like, I think it goes back to like, books in general, right? For writers and stuff, you have to sometimes take a risk, right? If in Fallout 4 you decided that, you're going to destroy the Brotherhood of Steel, but then in TV show, you're going to want them to be part of, the West Coast, going from the East Coast to the West Coast. You got to make a choice, right? And I'm like, pick a side, right? You cannot be in the middle, right? It's either they are destroyed or they're not destroyed. You're all in or all out, right? And so when it comes to the writing, I feel like that also matters, where there cannot be no halvesies, right? Because if it's halvesies in an RPG and in the sequel it invalidates what you did, players are not going to be happy.
I feel like the difference between like a video game and a book is, video games like Fallout 4 will have various endings. A book has one, and they kind of have to pick
unless it's those
where they're going to go. Unless it's those choose your own adventure books. Exactly. But generally, books have one ending, versus video games have options for a lot of them. But to make a sequel, you have to have a very specific ending for a video game. But they still allow you to play however you want to. It just means that there is a very specific ending. Yeah.
And that's what matters. That's also what matters in RPGs. Like, the ending should matter, the character should matter, the side characters, your companions should matter, the world should matter. And I guess any other thoughts on RPGs, honestly?
Well, I feel like it's hard because I play a lot of like JRPGs, and I'm like, that's an RPG. But what makes those like Japanese ones different from like Bethesda is the role-playing aspect, is how you fight, how you dress them up, how you...
like Persona.
Yeah, like Persona. Like I've played probably too many Final Fantasy games. And the role-playing in that is that you're kind of more like The Witcher, where it's a very specific person with a specific personality, but there is no real choices other than what skills are you going to learn, how are you going to dress. And that's basically it. Like Final Fantasy 7, the new one. It's basically just, how are you going to equip Cloud to fight Sephiroth? That's the role-playing aspect. And you're just playing as Cloud, and everything that's happening is to you, aka Cloud, but it's just you're playing as this person that's already set, that's already have their choices. There is no option to side with Sephiroth. You can't. Yeah. Unlike Fallout 4, where you can choose to side with the Institute. JRPGs don't really do that. That's just, they're still RPGs, but it's in a different way.
So what do you think is your preference then? Would you rather play a game where it's already based on an established character? Like, let's say, right, for the next Witcher game that are going to come out, let's say for some reason, right, they go with Geralt, or actually go with Ciri for the 4th game, right? Would you rather like play like Ciri, or would you rather play like the next Elder Scrolls, where again you are technically having a blank slate, you're a prisoner, getting out of prison? What would you rather choose?
I think it's like vanilla ice cream versus chocolate. I like both, but sometimes I want chocolate, sometimes I want vanilla. Sometimes I really like the Witcher story, so if they were like, we're making a Witcher 4 with Ciri as the main character, I'd be like, sweet. I want another Witcher 3, but with Ciri. Versus like Skyrim, I'm like, I want to make my own character and do that. So there's some people that prefer having totally free reign over their character like in Skyrim, or there's some people that just really like a very in-depth story about this one person who's already very set in stone, and you make minor choices. And so it's just like, do you want vanilla or you want chocolate? That's
actually a good analogy. Would you rather vanilla or chocolate? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Got it right over here. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, when writing RPGs or doing RPGs, a lot goes into it, right? And for those of you who are listening and do want to get into that gaming world and be like a head writer for like, I don't know, the next Witcher game or the next Cyberpunk game, right? There's a lot of ingredients that need to go into the pot, right? And I mean, at the end of the day, like, you gotta make sure your writing's good, right? Because the story, the characters, all this all matters, right? And unless you're like Starfield, where like there's no sauce to it, like players are not gonna be.
Well, and I feel like gameplay choices, because I feel like at the end the different endings, that's like a gameplay kind of choice type thing. But all these versus JRPG versus Bethesda or BioWare, all of them have in common is that they're well written. All the characters are interesting. The plot is really cool. It possibly has very crazy set pieces. For example, in Final Fantasy X, it starts with a giant monster attacking you. Or in Skyrim, like we said, dragons, civil war, crazy. All these things really grab your attention, and they're very interesting. They have compelling characters, compelling plot points, with a satisfying conclusion, which is what they all have in common. If they're JRPG, if they're Bethesda, whatever. If it's RPG, that's generally what they are. Is they're a very compelling story that you get to participate in.
You always want your player to be in the driver's seat. You never want them to feel like they are just watching the story from a standpoint. And I feel like they're having no input in it. Like, yeah, the best games are the ones where the players are fully in control, right? Let's go full circle. What's a bad RPG that you're just like, I ain't ever touching this ever again? And do not count Starfield.
Not Starfield.
Not Starfield.
We want to hate on Starfield too hard.
We don't want them to come after us.
I feel like if it's a bad RPG, it possibly has something to do with playing it. For example, I love Final Fantasy. I've played like 15 of them. I've played almost all of them at this point. Yeah. And I just can't get through Final Fantasy 15. And I just don't like playing it. There's too much side stuff I have to do to be able to play the main story. The main story it's interesting once you actually get to it, but there's so much extra stuff. All the side quests that you have to do. It's something that Dragon Age Inquisition kind of has too, where there's so much extra stuff that I don't want to do. But if I want to keep playing the main story, I have to do it. Those are generally the RPGs I'm like, womp womp. And I feel like it has to do more with gameplay than the actual story. I feel like most RPGs or most games have a fun story. It's just, how do they have you play through it?
Okay. Yeah, because like games like Telltale, right? Like they're infamous for having good RPG games, right? But their gameplay is so simplistic that one can argue where it's like, well, like I want to move more, right? Because it's a very click and point, right? Yeah, but the story is that good that it kind of overshadows the simplistic gameplay. It's kind of like The Last of Us, right? The gameplay is not too crazy. Like specifically the first game, it's not too crazy, but the story in the first one carries the gameplay, so people just overlook the gameplay and are just like, well, no, I'm more focused on the story, right? And I guess for me, I think I want to consider it a bad RPG. It's just like I'm always picky when it comes to RPGs, but I guess one that kind of disappointed me was The Outer Worlds from Obsidian.
You didn't like The Outer Worlds?
I thought it was decent, but it just felt very overwhelmingly like it's overwhelmingly, because there's a fine line when it comes to like presenting your player with a bunch of things, right? You don't want it to be overwhelming, but you also don't want it to be like this world is not alive, right? And what Skyrim did good is that it's just everything feels like spread out, right? Like, the factions are not in just one city, right? But Obsidian, like the Outer Worlds, I don't know, it just felt it didn't have the sauce.
I feel like maybe it wasn't big enough.
It wasn't big enough.
Or it wasn't long enough either.
It wasn't long enough either.
I feel like it was very short. And I was like, oh, that's it?
And it felt, the characters were great, but the story is just, like, it wasn't too enticing for me. Like, I know what they were trying to do. Like, you are starting as a blank slate, and you're coming from the ship, right? But then it said, like, well, you got to save the colonists, right, that are in this frozen ship. But for me, it's like, okay, well, why do I have to? What's wrong with me just going with the bad guys, right? Like, they have more of an incentive for me to join than just to save a bunch of random people. There is no, like, it doesn't state whether I have friends or family. And I know maybe Obsidian's like, well, maybe you do have friends or family in that ship, right? But it's like, well, if you don't specifically state me, I don't want to kind of think I don't want to headcanon I have like a lover in there, right? And
I guess they got to give you like a clear goal and why you want to do that.
Yeah,
for example, like in Fallout 4, you want to find the Institute because they have Sean and you want to get Sean back. Or in Skyrim, I don't even know, I guess you want to seek out the dragons because who wouldn't want to go find a dragon?
I mean, it's the fact that it's a dragon. It's like, I want to find a dragon. Well, I think it's also because, like, you're also technically the chosen one, and you're supposed to save this world, right? Well, Skyrim is different because it's very expensive, right? But with Obsidian, with the Outer Worlds, there just was no incentive for me to save the colonists. Like, why should I? Like, why should I save them? Yeah. I'd rather be like a space pirate and just go out the world. Like,
and you can do that, but it does eventually lead you back. Like, come on.
Yeah, like,
do the main story.
Do the main story. Like, please. Like, they basically beg me to do the main story. But yeah, I think that's how we should wrap up. Starfield and Outer Worlds suck. Not sorry. No, I'm sorry, Obsidian. But
you just have to keep people's attention.
I just realized that we did not talk about Star Wars. Knights of the Old Republic.
The Old Republic is really good.
How could we ignore that?
Well, that's another BioWare game.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason they made Mass Effect is because they were working on another Star Wars game after Knights of the Old Republic, and they were like, why don't we just make our own space game where we don't have to follow the lore of Star Wars? And that's why they made Mass Effect.
Yeah.
And that's why the first one's still kind of like...
I totally forgot to mention, just to preface, I think Knights of the Republic is a very great
I played it game. For the first time last year. It was just really good. But that's one that I don't like playing only because the gameplay is so frustrating.
It's outdated, right?
It's outdated. It's so outdated.
Oh, 100%. Like The Witcher 1.
That's why they're remaking The Witcher 1 and why they're remaking Knights of the Old Republic, because they're so brutal to have to play. The story is really good, and that's why you play it now. And back then, that's just how games were.
Yeah.
But now you play it because, well, the story's good. But man, this is awful.
Yeah, they try their best to do like a remastered. Like, I know they came out with the remastered on the Switch, but it's very, very outdated. Like, do not like, if you're like into those like retro type of games, like, you'll have fun. But gamers who are very used to like the Naughty Dog type of games, or you know, like a Sucker Punch type of game, like, they want more movement, and Knights of the Republic is very, again, click and point, you know?
Click and point. The gameplay, yeah, I mean, that's the Knights of the Old Republic, great story. Awesome. Revan, all that. Awesome. High Republic. But having to sit there and have my keyboard freeze because it can't input anything anymore because the game is old. And the controls and trying to do this and that. I don't know if I'll play that again.
This might be a side. This may not be related to RPGs, but when I played Resident Evil Code Veronica, that was such a hard game to go through. The story was good, but the fact that like I cannot skip the cutscenes, I cannot save. Like it saves for me. I know that's the whole point of Resident Evil, but the fact that I just can't like do like a quick save or anything like that, it's a gameplay can really butcher. Like, if the gameplay is really that bad, it can really overtake the story. But, yeah, I think at the end of the day, about RPGs and stuff like that, you know, again, recapping, good character, good side characters, good companions, good world, good universe, all that type of stuff. And then maybe some of you might be actual game developers, but make sure that the game or your book just does not get bogged down with unnecessary stuff, you know? Luckily, we live in an age where things are way more accessible, more easier to do. So if you're a game developer, you don't worry. I don't think you'll ever have to worry about that type of things, about click and point. Unless you're an indie game developer, then at that point, like, best of luck to you. But yeah, so I think that should wrap up today's episode of what makes a good RPG. Thank you, Sam on the Street, for joining us here today. I think if we'll ever talk about video games again, we'll definitely bring you in.
Okay.
Sweet. Can't wait. But thank you all for listening to the Occam's Razors Untitled podcast. Thank you for joining in today, and we'll catch you on the next episode. All right. See you guys. Say bye, Sam.
Bye. Bye, Sam.